In the lively village of Abodu, there was a man named Olum. He was the richest man anyone had ever seen. He had fields full of crops, cows that stretched as far as the eye could see, and gold coins stacked high in his house. But ID was different despite all his riches. He wore clothes that were torn and smelly. He shed hard heat, and his pants looked like they had been chewed by rats. People in the village couldn't understand why a rich man would dress like a beggar. Every morning, Heidi walked through the village market, greeting people with a smile. But instead of greeting him back, people turned their noses up. Why does it smell so bad? One woman whispered, "He must be mad." Another said children pointed at him and laughed. They called him names like the ragged rich man or the smelly millionaire. ID never got angry. He just kept smiling and went about his day as if nothing was wrong. ID had three children who were ashamed of him. They were smart, polite, and well dressed, but they avoided their father as much as they could at school. Other children teased them. "Your papa is the smelly man," they shouted. Said the children were so embarrassed that they lied. "That's not our father." They told their friends even when ID came to their school to watch their plays or meetings. They pretended not to know him. It made ID sad, but he never said anything at home. ID's wife, Norma, was confused and upset. She did not understand why her husband, who was so rich, refused to wear nice clothes or clean himself up. "ID," she asked one night, "why do you like to live like this? We have so much. Why won't you wear proper clothes?" ID looked at her with sad eyes, but he did not answer. "You would not understand." He finally said. Emma was frustrated. She decided that one day she would find out the truth. One evening, Emma sat by the fire, thinking about her husband's strange behavior. She watched Esum carefully folded his smelly tall cloth before going to bed. She couldn't understand why he loved those rags so much. "It's like a spell," she thought to herself. The children had started avoiding him completely, spending more time at their friends' houses. Norma sighed deeply. She missed the days when her family was happy. She decided that no matter what, she would uncover the mystery behind ID's rags the next day. ID left the house early to check his farmland while he was gone. Un searched every corner of the house. She opened boxes, lifted mattresses, and checked inside cupboards. Finally, she found a small wooden chest hidden under their bed. Inside was a strange piece of paper covered in symbols and writing she did not understand. As she stared at the paper, she noticed something odd. Her hands started trembling, and a cold wind swept through the room. Norma felt a chill run down her spine, but she couldn't stop herself from reading the paper. Symbols glowed faintly, as if they were owl. She managed to make out a few words. "Wealth comes with a price peak of this key, and this will bring doom." Her heart raced as she realized what the paper meant. It had made some kind of deal to gain his riches, and those rugs were part of the price he had to pay. The evening when Olum returned, Ina confronted him. "I found this paper under our bed," she said firmly. ID froze his face, pale with fear. "You weren't supposed to see that," he whispered. "What have you done?" Ahmed demanded answers, but they begged her to stop. "If you know too much, it will bring H to you," he pleaded. But couldn't let go. She needed to understand why her husband had chosen such a strange and lonely life. ID sat down, his head in his hand. He finally told her this truth years ago when we were poor and struggling. A mysterious voice had spoken to him one night. The voice promised him unimaginable riches, but warned that there would be a cost. ID would have to wear rags for the rest of his life, and he could never reveal the truth about the deal. If he broke the rules, Everything he had, his riches, his family, and even his life would be taken away. Shock. Why would you agree to something like that? She asked. ID looked at her with tears in his eyes. I did it for us. He said, I wanted you and the children to have a better life. I thought I could bear the cost, but didn't realize how hard it would be. Norma felt a mix of anger and sadness. She understood his love for their family, but the price of his choice had been too high. The next morning, Norma woke up feeling weak and dizzy. Her head hurt and her body felt heavy. ID rushed to her side. Worried it's the K, he whispered, panic in his voice. You weren't supposed to know the truth. Name tried to stay strong, but her condition wasn't dead. As the day went on, the children were scared and did not understand what was happening to their mother. ID felt helpless, knowing there was nothing he could do to save her by nightfall. NMA's strength was gone. She called her children to her bedside and held their hands. Take care of each other, she said softly. She looked at ID. One last time, her eyes filled with love and sorrow. I forgive you, she whispered before closing her eyes. Forever. Olum fell to his knees, overcome with grief. The children cried, not understanding why their mother had to leave them. The house that was once filled with laughter now felt empty and cold. After Norma's deaths, the villagers began to fear Olum even more. They whispered that his wealth was cursed and that his wife had paid the price for uncovering the truth. Some people avoided his house completely, believing it was haunted. Others spied him but didn't. Dare to approach ID was left alone with only his memories and regrets for company. His children grew even more distant, blaming him for their mother's death. The children refused to speak to Olum. They, they moved to another part of the village, staying with relatives who would care for them. When people asked about their father, they would say, we don't have a father. Alum tried to reach out to them, but they slammed the door in his face. Whenever he went to reach out, he would sit outside their house for hours, hoping to catch a glimpse of them. But they never came out. His heart broke a little more each day. ID's riches brought him no joy. The golden coins and fancy house felt like a heavy weight on his shoulders. He stopped going to the market because he couldn't bear the way people looked at him. His only visitors were the straight animals that wandered into his yard. He shared his food with them, finding comfort in their silent company. The man who once had everything now had nothing but his rags, and his sorrow days turned into weeks and became a shadow of his former self. He rarely spoke to anyone and spent most of his time sitting under the big mango tree near his house. The villagers watched him from afar, whispering stories about his cost. Fortune, he traded his soul for gold. Some said his wife paid the price, others. The once proud man who had walked through the village with his head held high now seemed like a broken figure lost in his thoughts and regrets. One day, a little boy named E, who had just moved to the village, saw ID sitting under the tree. He didn't know the stories about him, so he walked up to him and said, Why do you look so sad? Was surprised. No one had spoken to him kindly in a long time. I've made many mistakes. ID replied. He tilted his head and asked, Can you fix them? ID smiled faintly. Some mistakes can't be fixed. He said he visited ID every day, asking him questions about his life. The boy's curiosity reminded ID of his own children when they were younger. For the first time in years, Alam felt a small spark of hope. He told Ife stories about the old days, about the village, and about kindness. He listened carefully, his eyes wide with wondered the villagers. Noticed the boy spending time with ID and why others want him to stay away. Others felt pity for the lonely man. One evening, Eve asked, ID, why do you always wear these old clothes, ID? Hesitated, remembering the sea. He couldn't tell the boy the truth. So he said, these clothes remind me of who I used to be. If didn't fully understand, but he nodded. Maybe one day you will wear something new, the boy said cheerfully. I'd chuckled softly. Maybe he replied, though deep down he knew it wasn't possible. The boy's innocence gave him a small comfort he hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, ID's children heard about if VI's visiting their father. They were curious, but too angry and ashamed to see him. He brought this cause upon himself. They told each other, why would we care? Yet late at night when they were alone, they missed him. They remembered how he used to play with them, tell them stories, and make them laugh despite their anger. A part of them longed to understand why their father had chosen this strange life. One night, yeah, ID dreamed of Ona. In the dream, she stood in their home looking just as she had before she died. ID, she said softly, your children need you, but they are lost in their anger. Be patient with them. Alone woke up with tears in his eyes. He decided he would try once more to reach out to his children. No matter how much they pushed him away, he knew he owed it to them and to make things right. The next day, walked to the house where his children lived. He stood outside, clutching the small wooden chest he had hidden for so many years when his eldest son, Chibuzo, opened the door and saw him. He frowned. Why are you here? He asked coldly. ID held out the chest. I want to show you something, he said. Chibuzo hesitated, but let him in. The other two children gathered around, watching their father Welly as he placed the chest on the table. ID opened the chest and showed them the parchment. He didn't say much, knowing the CA would stop him from revealing too much. This, he said, pointing to the strange writing, is why I wear these clothes. The children didn't understand the symbols, but they could see the pain in their father's eyes. I did it for all of you, he whispered, his voice trembling. I wanted to give you a best life for the first time. The children saw their father's pain. Chibuzo picked up the parchment and studied it. So this is why Mama died, he asked angrily. Heidi nodded, tears streaming down his face. I never wanted her to know, he said. I begged her to leave it alone, but she loved us too much to stop. The children felt a mix of anger, sadness, and guilt. They had blamed their father for so long, but now they saw how much he had sacrificed for them. It was a heavy truth to bear. Slowly, the children began to forgive ID. It wasn't easy, and it took time, but they started visiting him again. They no longer avoided him in public. And even though they still did not understand everything, they knew he had acted out of love. ID felt a sense of relief, though his heart still ached for Nora. He spent more time with his children, telling them stories about their mother and teaching them the lessons he had learned from his mistakes one evening. ID sat with his children under the big mango tree outside his house. The youngest, Adaisi, asked Papa, do you regret making the deal? ID sighed deeply, staring at the golden sunset every day. He said softly, I thought I was doing what was best for our family, but I didn't think about what it would cost me, what it would cost all of us. The children sat quietly reflecting on his words. For the first time, they understood the burden their father had carried alone for so many years. Despite the growing bond between Umum and his children, the villagers still avoided him. They whispered about his cost, wealth, and kept their distance. One day, he visited ID and asked, Why don't you leave the village? Go somewhere near where people won't treat you this way. Alum smiled and shook his head. This is my home, he said. No matter what people think of me, I belong here. And one day they will understand that wealth isn't everything. As time passed, ID became a quiet presence in the village. He no longer sought to impress anyone or explain himself. Instead, he focused on his children and the same simple joys of life. He planted flowers around his house, shared food with those in need, and spent his evening under the mango tree. Slowly, some villagers began to see him in a different light. Maybe he's not cursed, they murmured. Maybe he's just a man who made a difficult choice. One rainy afternoon, ID invited his children for a meal. He cooked their favorite dishes just as Norma used to do as they ate. They laughed and shared stories. For the first time in years, the house felt warm and full of life. Mama would have loved this, Chibuzo said, smiling. ID's heart swelled with gratitude. Though he couldn't change the past, he was determined to cherish this moment and rebel the love he had almost lost one day. He brought his mother to meet ID. She had heard about the ragged rich man and was curious when she saw Lom's kind smile and gentle eyes. She was surprised. You're not what I expected, she said. ID chuckled. Most people think I'm a madman, he replied. I'm just a man who made mistakes. His mother left with a new perspective. And soon she began telling others in the village that ID wasn't as strange as they thought. Words spread quickly, and more villagers began to approach ID Day. At first, they came cautiously, but over time, they realized he wasn't dangerous or coarse. They started asking him for advice and help, and gladly shared his wisdom. We all make mistakes. He told them the important thing is to learn from them and to do better. His words resonated with many, and slowly the villagers began to respect him. ID's reputation started to change. People stopped calling him the ragged rich man, even though he still wore his old tea clothes. They no longer laughed at him. Instead, they listened to his stories and sought his guardian. Sometimes ID felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He still missed Ina, but he believed she would be proud of how far he had come one day. A.W. Merchant visited the village. He wore fine clothes and carried himself with pride, but he treated the villagers poorly, looking down on them. ID watched from his seat under the mango tree. When the merchant approached him, he sneered. You call yourself rich, the man said, pointing at ID's rags. ID smiled calmly and replied, True, wealth isn't in gold or fine clothes. It's in the love and respect of those around you. The merchant laughed, but the villagers nodded in agreement. They had seen the truth in ID's words. The merchant left the village in frustration, but ID remained surrounded by people who valued him for who he was. His children, who had once denied him, now stood proudly by his side. They had learned that their father's strength came not from his wealth, but from his heart and the sacrifices he had made for their family years later. ID's children grew up and started families of their own. They often brought their children to visit him, sharing stories of their mother and the lessons they had learned. ID's home, once empty and quiet, was now filled with laughter and the sound of little feet running around. He felt a joy he hadn't experienced in a long time, knowing that his sacrifices had not been in vain. One evening, Asad sat under the mango tree. His youngest grandchild climbed onto his lap. Grandpa, the child asked, Why do you wear these clothes? ID chuckled, his eyes twinkling. These clothes remind me of an important lesson. He said, They remind me that love and family are worth more than all the gold in the world. The child nodded, though he didn't fully understand, and nestled closer to him as Idi grew older. The villagers continued to seek his wisdom. He became a beloved figure in Abodu, not because of his wealth, but because of his kindness and humility. People came from far and wide to hear his stories and learn from his experiences. Idi was no longer lonely. He had found his place in the world, and the village had found a leader in him. One quiet morning, Idi passed peacefully in his sleep. The entire village mourned his loss. His children and grandchildren organized a grand celebration of his life. Sharing the lessons he had taught them, the villagers gathered under the mango tree, where he had spent so many of his days, and planted a small garden. In his honor, the garden grew beautifully with bright flowers and strong trees. People came to the spot to reflect on Olom's life and the wisdom he had shared. His story became a legend in OBU, told to children for generations. They learned about sacrifice, love, and the true meaning of wealth. Though Idi was gone, his spirit lived on in the village he had called home. His tuned clothes became a symbol of humility, and his story reminded everyone that riches could never replace the value of family and kindness. The man who once wore rags was not remembered as the richest man of all, not because of his gold, but because of his heart. Thank you so much for watching. If you got to this point, please give this video a thumbs up. It will help grow my small YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do well to subscribe and turn on post notifications so you get notified when I post more interesting contents like this. If you haven't gone through my channel yet, please do so and watch my other videos. I have more interesting content on my channel as well. Please leave a comment in the comment section and let me know your thoughts on this video. See you guys in my next video. Bye.